If you've ever wondered what it's actually like to be a psychedelic guide, then this episode is for you. I'm Elena, and this is the integration session where we explore the science, stories, and future of psychedelics. My guest today is Denise Rue, a psychedelic therapist, clinical social worker, and hypnotherapist with a wealth of knowledge facilitating psychedelic therapy. In this episode, we discuss her journey to the field, the nuances of guiding individuals and groups through psychedelic therapy, the intersection of hypnosis and psychedelics, advice for aspiring therapists, and even the role of poetry in psychedelic therapy. Let's dive in. Hello, Denise, and welcome to the Integration Session podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm so excited, and thank you for inviting me.
Of course. So, can you walk us through your journey into psychedelic science and therapy? From what I know, you have sort of a pretty diverse educational background. So, how did that influence your path to becoming a trauma-focused psychotherapist and a psychedelic therapist in general?
Yeah, it was a long road, and I came to psychedelics very late. It was never in my life plan. So my educational and my career trajectory started out as a speech language pathologist, and I think that has informed me because I worked with such a diverse group of clients, from children who were profoundly disabled to adult neurologically impaired. So I really got a comfort level with working with a diverse caseload and developed my compassion and my patience. Yeah. And then I think my education and my work as a poet has helped me have a facility working with metaphor, image, help me choose my words carefully. My work in hospice has been really instrumental in preparing me for psychedelic assisted therapy, because that work is very much about presence, creating a safe space so the person who is transitioning can feel supported. And then my background in hypnosis, that gave me a real respect for what the unconscious mind can hold and how it can be part of our healing journey. Made me really more skilled at being attuned to people without language. And then my work as a therapist, I think the biggest component was my deep training in trauma, working with people with complex PTSD, helped me understand about transference, countertransference, boundaries, attachment, so much. So it really was quite the journey. And then I came to psychedelics. It was never in my life's plan, but when I was working at a community mental health center, and I started reading the early research that was coming out of Johns Hopkins, NYU, and a light bulb went off, and I said, oh, this could alleviate a lot of suffering. But I had never done psychedelics. So I didn't do psychedelics till I was 60. And then I booked a retreat. It was transformative. And they asked me to come back and work as a therapist. So I was able to spend 3 years in the retreat world as a therapist and retreat leader.
Okay, so really diverse range of experiences that you've had that have sort of led you to this point as a psychedelic therapist. And I love that you have a background in poetry. I think that's so interesting. And have you found that that has sort of helped in psychedelic therapy because the experience is so ineffable? And I feel like poets have a way of placing words to things that we can't really describe easily.
Yes, absolutely. I use poetry in all stages of the process. Um, And sometimes I think with certain populations, if I'm working with people who are very left brain, I'm like, oh, they won't be into this. But people are looking for that. They hunger for something that reaches deeply. And I just find when I can't find the right words for this ineffable experience, I always can turn to a poem.
That's beautiful. And in this episode, I would love to get across to our listeners what it's really like to be a psychedelic therapist and a guide and everything that comes with that. So, from
Mm-hmm.
your experience in this space, if you could just give like an overview of what does a typical session look like and how do you sort of tailor your approach in each therapy session to the individual sitting in front of you and just create a
Mm.
safe, supported environment for them.
Yeah, so it's important to remember that when we talk about psychedelic therapy, it has three stages: the preparation, the medicine session, and the integration session. And each are equally important. I know some people think, well, all the bells and whistles are in the ceremony, and that's where people may have the big experiences. But what is required is really solid preparation and integration with what went on in the medicine session. So, preparation really entails doing a really good screening. So people who should not be using these medicines are not put at risk. Doing a full biopsychosocial intake, really getting informed on people's trauma history and their capacity. What are their resources? What are their coping strategies? Their distress tolerance, their emotional regulation skills. That's all really important. And then part of preparation is, excuse me, is educating the client on these are the things that you may reasonably expect in your session. Getting clear on what is somebody's intention, what's their motivation, what are their fears. So a lot of work is done in the preparation sessions that precede the ceremony. And then in the ceremony, that will last X number of hours depending on which psychedelic you're using. But what's key there is educating the client so they have the trust in the medicine and trust in themselves and in the relationship with the facilitator so they can surrender, so they can fully relax and open to the experience and allow whatever wants to unfold. And sometimes that can be quite challenging. And so the role of the facilitator there is never to do therapy per se. Our currency is not language so much as presence. So how are we holding the space for the client so they can feel supported, so they feel that they can reach out if they need any guidance or encouragement along the way. And then in the integration session, that's where the individual will take their experiences from the session, the cognitive insights, emotional breakthroughs, spiritual experiences, mystical experiences, and make sense of them, kind of operationalize them into what would that look like on the ground. Because the psychedelics plant the seed, but then it is up to the individual to operationalize those, to water that seed. And you want to be able to take advantage of the window of neuroplasticity that the psychedelic will open up for the individual. And then just in terms of keeping the individual safe, that really comes down to the relational aspect, really knowing this isn't a cookie cutter process at all. What is this individual bringing to the medicine? And to meet that client where he or she is and to work skillfully to optimize what the medicine can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that process for issues like trauma, that I know you have a focus in, how does that differ from traditional therapy? So, what are some aspects of psychedelic medicine that can really help people with trauma?
Yeah. So when we think of traditional therapy within that biomedical model, often it's very much focused on the intellect, cognitive behavioral therapy, and maybe medication management. So working with psychedelics is a completely different paradigm. So it's less about symptom management and more about the opportunity to really have transformation. So I think some of the key ways that psychedelic therapy is different in that it allows people to come closer to their symptoms, if you will, less experiential avoidance, more acceptance. So people can meet their suffering, their symptoms, their challenges, whatever you want to call it. And with support, they can alchemize or transmute their suffering and come out on the other end. So it's a very much an embodied process. It's a very physical, emotional process. And people usually feel incredibly empowered having gone through a psychedelic session. And then psychedelics bring us into connection with ourselves, relationally with others, with the world, perhaps with spirit. And I think with psychedelics, what is so different is it's not an intellectual process, it's embodied. It can afford a client's first ever, sometimes, connection with self-compassion. Most people know that they should be kinder to themselves, but often in a psychedelic session, they get that experience. They get the experience very often of having that chattering monkey mind quiet. Sometimes they can have a traumatic release through the body, through tremoring, through purging. That just doesn't happen in traditional therapy. They also can connect with great gratitude and acceptance of their life and understanding how it maybe fits into a different, more holistic picture. And then if someone is gifted with a mystical experience in their journey, that can really afford some life-changing experiences there for them. Yeah, so
Yeah.
many ways. And of any therapeutic modality I've worked with, and I work also with hypnosis, with EMDR, with somatic experiencing, psychedelics can just get in there, get issues at their root, and really offer a transformational experience for someone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're so powerful. And we'll
Yeah.
definitely get into your hypnotherapy work because I really want to know more about that. But first, I just want to
Mhm.
ask about the differences in psychedelic therapy and your experience being a guide in a group setting. So, what's it like to guide those psychedelic experiences in a group, and what are the most rewarding and challenging aspects of that?
Mm. So group work is gold. That's where the rubber meets the road for me. So very, very few challenges as long as you've done proper screening and intake. I mean, certain individuals maybe aren't ideal for a group, maybe somebody with a narcissistic personality disorder. So you might want to screen certain people out of a group. But I think the most important thing is having adequate facilitator to guest ratio. You don't want to have a group where there's just one or two facilitators and 20 group members. So you want to have coverage so every guest feels safe. But I think healing in a group offers so many more layers of healing. Mental health challenges can be very shame-filled and very isolating. So when we heal in a group, people have an opportunity to come from a very vulnerable, honest place, talk about their traumas, talk about their challenges, and to be met without judgment, to be met with acceptance, and to hear other people who are perhaps have similar experiences. So there's a lessening of shame, there's a lessening of isolation and otherness. And when people are doing this in a group, it's like you're in the trenches. I mean, to watch other people transform, to support them, to have other people support you. It's like creating a healthy family. And when people heal in a group, it's as if they've found their tribe. Mm-hmm. And then that tribe, they're yours forever. So I think group work is really where so much healing can happen. And I'd like to see us move towards that.
It makes sense. Like humans are very social animals, and yes. We evolved to be social. Psychedelics have historically been used in community settings, in indigenous traditions. So I think it makes sense completely, and I hope to see that as well more in the future. And getting back to your hypnotherapy knowledge, so what are the differences? Like, can you break down for our listeners what is clinical hypnotherapy and how is that related or different from psychedelic therapy?
Well, you're accessing with both non-ordinary states of consciousness. So you're accessing the subconscious, if you will. But with psychedelics, you also have a lot more power, usually. And you can also access, I think, intergenerational trauma and collective aspects. It's quite powerful. So hypnosis, just very briefly, it's not mind control. It's not something that anyone does to you. All hypnosis is self-hypnosis. It's basically using bodily relaxation and your mind to access your inner healer and to access the wealth that is in our unconscious. And one of the things that can be most powerful for people is to understand that we're in trance or hypnosis perhaps 1/3 of our day. That's the estimate. We're not in present moment awareness. We might be in a trance of the past, thinking about every bad thing that happened to us, ruminating, going over things. What if I? Why didn't I? And that can often lead to depression and obsessive thoughts. Or we're in a trance of the future, right? What ifing? Being, fueling the imagined future with fear, rehearsing in a way that doesn't help us. So I think when people understand the negative trance and how they can be aware of it and bring themselves back to the present, that can be very empowering. And being able to access the deep relaxation of hypnosis, and then being able to access the wisdom in your unconscious. That can be transformative for people.
Mhm. And are there any examples of how hypnosis could help in the psychedelic model of therapy? So let's say an integration. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, so you're not going to do hypnosis, you're not going to introduce any hypnotic suggestions during a psychedelic session. That would really be a violation. But in preparation, it can be really useful in helping people learn how to access deep relaxation, staying in touch with the breath, helping them notice when they go up into their mind and they're leaving their body. So that can be very, very useful. And then in integration, people can access trance states in order to revisit some of their experiences during the psychedelic journey. And they can also use hypnosis or non-ordinary states of consciousness in integration. So perhaps in automatic drawing or in creative arts, but continuing to tap into the wisdom of the unconscious mind. So they do dovetail very nicely.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, you don't hear a lot about that.
Yes, I will have to write a book about
Yeah, for
that.
sure. And what advice would you give to aspiring psychedelic therapists, specifically regarding ethical practices such as informed consent and harm reduction? What are your go-to pieces of advice there?
hmm So I would first say this work is so rewarding, but it's a huge responsibility. People are very, very vulnerable when they're under the influence of a psychedelic. So we have to hold that responsibility and honor that. So I would say it's not enough to come in with compassion and sincerity. Those are really important. You have to have a lot of skill and training, especially in the areas of trauma. And that takes time. And I believe one should have their own experience with the psychedelic that you're going to be using. And it's tricky because if people don't live somewhere where a psychedelic is legal, then they have to deal with that whole legal aspect. I was so fortunate because I was in Jamaica and I could dose, we could do the work without any of that layer of fear that sometimes comes with illegality. But in terms of the, the harm reduction, you said, and ethics,
Yeah, and
I
informed
believe.
consent as well.
Yeah, yeah. So informed consent, especially around therapeutic touch, is really, really important. So if you're a facilitator, really think about ethical practice. What does that mean? What does that look like? If you're a therapist, then you have a governing board that will hold you accountable. But we need to be internally accountable. Um, that really requires being very much in integrity, because I often say these medicines are usually safe, transformative, but they're potent mind shakers, and not everyone should be using them. So, for someone who may be newer to psychedelic assisted therapy, stay within your scope of practice. If you're newly certified, if you've just gone through a training program, you might want to get more supervision, before you work with someone who has really deep childhood trauma, and just keep doing your own inner work, keep reading the research that's coming out, get peer support, get supervision, learn from your elders in the field. Because it is, as I said, a huge responsibility.
Yeah, that's great advice. And you mentioned the legal or regulatory hurdles, and that's certainly there. But what about the like cultural or societal stigmas that are around psychedelics? Do you find that ever impacts your work negatively?
Well, it's so much different now than it was 10 years ago. I mean,
Totally.
psychedelic conversations are just in the atmosphere, and people are getting information through mainstream media. I would say that people are more interested, they're reading the research, but on the flip side, sometimes media can be a little biased, and people may come wanting a psychedelic session and have unrealistic expectations. And so that is something that the facilitator would have to work with in the preparation session, managing the person's expectations. Because I often say this is not a vending machine. You're not necessarily going to get your ego death or your mystical experience. So how can you work with this belief that whatever the medicine brings me to is what's meant to be, and even if I'm disappointed, that we can still work with it in a very integral and productive way.
Yeah, and do you find that there are any common misconceptions about either undergoing psychedelic therapy or being even a psychedelic guide?
Um, like I did touch a little on being a psychedelic guide. It again, if you're coming to this work, maybe because you've had transformational experiences with the medicine, that's a great place to start. But that's an N of one. Okay, we can't assume that just because you had certain experiences that everyone else will. So you do have to read the research. You really have to know what is the possibility. You have to be educated about adverse experiences that can come up, because it's not all unicorns and lollipops. But I would say with people coming to this medicine, so there's a huge need, right? Traditional methods of therapy and medication, it's just not meeting the suffering that's out here. So people are coming to these medicines often as a last resort. And at the retreat, we would get guests who were up in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and they are people that I would call highly psychiatrized. They'd been under they've had so many different psychiatric cocktails. They'd had every different kind of therapy, perhaps even ECT, and nothing really budged them. They were existing, but definitely not thriving. So people come to the medicine with those great hopes, and I understand that suffering. But if people are holding decades of trauma and they've been relating to that trauma and their suffering by just managing, then working with a psychedelic is very different, because it's going to plunk you right down in your body. So if you are used to keeping your suffering at bay and not going towards it, going into a psychedelic experience could be re-traumatizing. So that's where the preparation comes. Do you have the distress tolerance? Do you have the emotional regulation skills? Do you have the support when you get home to work with what the psychedelic might excavate in your system? So I think coming to the medicine like a quick fix is dangerous. And many times people say, I know this isn't going to be a magic bullet. But there is a part of them that wants that. Mm-hmm. And of course they want that. But that has to be managed beforehand, because if it doesn't work in the first session with people, they can really go down into a destructive rabbit hole. This didn't work for me, it works for everyone else, it's my fault. So that all has to be worked with skillfully, so people aren't re-traumatized and aren't left with deep despair after a psychedelic experience that doesn't meet their expectations.
Yeah, so important. And we're already at my last question, so I want to look ahead to the future. What excites you most about the evolving landscape of psychedelic therapy and research and science? Maybe like 10, 15 years ahead, what are you looking forward to?
So it's come so far, right? It's come so far in such a short time. So I'm hoping for more research. I would be very grateful for some of the psychedelics to be removed from Schedule 1 substances, right? Because we know they're not addictive, they don't cause harm usually, and they do have tremendous therapeutic capabilities. I would like to see more community infrastructure develop, so that people who are doing this work at a service center or going on a retreat, that they could return home and continue to find their tribe and people who get them, and people who really honor the inner life and continued growth. Because it can be very difficult when the veil is lifted in a psychedelic session and we come back to the old way of being. And because that can shrink us back. And our society is not particularly embracing, it's not particularly interested in our inner life. It's in spiritual experiences, into growth, into individuation. We're really very much honoring the head and productivity and moving forward. So I think when you're opened up with these experiences, we do need to have healing containers in community so people can keep those transformations alive and build on them and bring them out from the individual into the community, because that's what we're really tasked to do. We're not just doing this work for ourselves. We're invited to bring it into community, into relationships, our relationship with others, our neighborhood, the earth itself. So, but we need community to do that. We don't heal alone.
Mm. Thank you so much, Denise. You have so much knowledge, and I'm so grateful for you joining me for this today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much for listening to this conversation with Denise Rue. And thank you to the Center for Psychedelics, Health and Research at Queen's University, the Ontario Brain Institute, the Canadian Biomarker Integration Network in Depression, and Providence Care Hospital. Until next time, be well and integrate wisely.